Hello there, welcome to Saber Duel Gaming at the Movies, where we take a look at your favourite computer games and their translation onto the big screen. And we are starting with none other than Street Fighter. Yes, the Street Fighter games, and more predominantly the Street Fighter 2 series, yes, that's an entire series, were some of the most successful 1v1 fighting games ever created. Certainly through the mid-90s, these games were everywhere, and it was no surprise to see that they wanted to turn them into a successful movie. So let's find out if that's what happened. Released in 1994, Street Fighter the movie was coming out at the peak of the game's popularity. They also managed to bring on board director Steven D'Souza, who was behind films such as 48 Hours, Commando, and Die Hard 1 and 2, which meant they had someone who knew how to direct over-the-top, fun action films. And realistically, no one was going into this expecting a cinematic masterpiece. As long as it was exciting and entertaining, people were going to be happy, but it still had to have some sort of flowing storyline. And this shouldn't have been a problem. While Street Fighter 1 was just a generic fighting game, Street Fighter 2 had a relatively good story for each and every character. The problem they faced was, which character are we going to focus on? Even the original Street Fighter 2 had 8 main characters. By the time you brought in Championship Edition and Turbo and Super Street Fighter 2, the cast had doubled. So which characters were going to be our key focus? Well, despite Ken and Ryu being the obvious choice, the moment they brought on board Jean-Claude Van Damme, it was clear he wasn't going to play either of those characters. So instead, he was given the character of Guile. And whilst he's not exactly the main character, in the games, Guile is at least a third option, so that worked okay. Next, we needed someone to play M. Bison as the main villain from the games, and they managed to bring on board, to go against Van Damme, Raul Julia, who played the most ridiculous, over-the-top, silly, and truly fantastic version of M. Bison. It wasn't what we've seen in the games, but let's be honest, it was entertaining as hell, and it kept the movie alive. These two actually bounce off each other very well, and anyone who was going into the movie expecting anything serious, first of all, what were you thinking? But secondly, they were going to be a bit disappointed. Instead, these two were going to bring campy, action, and entertainment. The problem was everything else. You see, first of all, there's no street fighting tournament, so forget the theme of the game. The story instead focused on, in fairness, Guile's story in the game, in which his friend Charlie has been kidnapped, who we later find out has been mutated by M. Bison scientist, the peace-loving Dalsim, into the mutant Blanca. It's a little bit silly, but okay, that's enough for us to focus on. The problem is, that's not all they focused on. You see, Street Fighter 2 the game was notorious for each and every player having their own favourite character. Some people loved Guile, some people loved Ryu, some were more for Ken, others loved Chun-Li. Everyone had their own key character that they really focused all their efforts into practicing on. So the writers and producers wanted to make sure that every single angle was covered, every fan was going to be appeased, so they shoed in every single character from all the Street Fighter 2 games into this film, whether or not it made sense, and by God, it very often did not make sense. Don't get me wrong, some characters did, even if they were still a little bit awful. Let's look at Cammy, for example, played by Australian singer, actress Kylie Minogue. Cammy was meant to be an English agent. Okay, doesn't literally the opposite side of the world, but fine. If she can do the accent well, no she can't. But at least the character made sense. She was a soldier who was working alongside Guile, as was T-Hawk. Okay, that still fits, that'll do. The rest of them though, it got a little bit ridiculous. Your favourite sumo fighter E Honda and your favourite boxer Balrog? No, they're just cameramen working for Chun-Li. Dalsim, as we mentioned, the peace-loving yoga instructor. No, he's a scientist doing torturous experiments on Charlie. Okay. What about Sagat, the towering TIE fighter? No, he's a dodgy drug lord. Okay, so we're stretching things a little bit here. But at least one character did make sense and had a reasonable arc, and that was Chun-Li. Again, following her role from the game, Chun-Li's family had been killed by M. Bison, and she was out for revenge and determined to get a hold of him at any cost. The problem was, that wasn't remotely believable, because we all knew that Guile was the one who was going to have that end fight with M. Bison. I mean, come on. It's Jean-Claude Van Damme. He's the star. He is literally the key focus of the entire movie. So when we know that Chun-Li's focus is to be the one to kill him, we know it's not going to pan out, which is unfortunate because she's actually one of the better parts of the film. But that's just something we have to accept. The most disappointing characters in this are Ken and Ryu, the two main characters from the original Street Fighter who carried over into the Street Fighter 2 series. Ryu especially is meant to be an honourable, dedicated martial artist committed to the fight. But the two of them are just dodgy con artists, which is a real slap in the face to their fans. Now you might notice that we're, say, 2/3 into this video, and I haven't really focused on much of the fighting yet. That's because the film didn't either. You see, for a film based on a franchise that is totally focused on one-on-one fighting, this film doesn't really have any of it. You see, we manage at one point to get a teased fight inside a cage, no less, between Ryu and Vega. Okay, awesome, except it doesn't happen. Guile just barges through the wall with a tank instead. We eventually get that final fight between Guile and M. Bison, which is mostly done using magnets making him fly and attack Guile. It's all very weird, don't ask. There just isn't a great deal of actual one-on-one fighting in it. There's a fair few action scenes, including one on a boat, because we all remember the epic boat scenes in the Street Fighter 2 games, but beyond that, there just isn't that much one-on-one combat, which is a bit of a shame because there are so many dream fights between these characters that people would have loved to see on screen. Instead, it all seems to get shoehorned in that final fight at the end. Guile and his team are attacking M. Bison's weird little nation castle, and we just throw characters next to each other for a few seconds to have a fight, at which point they suddenly turn into sumo fighters or boxers. It's all very convoluted and very, very silly. And this is why I chose Street Fighter to do first when it came to looking at game-to-movie adaptations, because it's just the perfect example of how these things go. They always tend to end up being just a little bit silly. But here's the trick to it. It's still so much fun. This is the perfect example of a film that people would rank as a guilty pleasure. You are never going to sit someone down and say, watch this film is so cool. But you're going to quietly put it on every now and then and just giggle away to yourself stupidly because it is entertaining. And granted, a big chunk of that is the over-the-top silly acting. It's the ridiculousness of the so-called special moves being seen in live action. But regardless, does it matter? Movies are like games. They're there to entertain us, and we don't always know how they're going to entertain us. But if they do, maybe that's enough. The Street Fighter 2 movie wasn't exactly the same rip-roaring success that the games were, but on hindsight, it was good enough fun. So, how do we rate it? It's a silly, dumb film, but it's entertaining enough, and I think it deserves a 6.5 out of 10. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more of these, let me know what films you'd like me to review, and you can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube.